Hey everyone, and welcome back to The Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled you're here today because we're doing something really fun. We're putting on our loops and conducting a true expert collector's appraisal on what might just be a brand new frontier in the watch market. You know, as collectors, we're literally always hunting for provenance, right? We want that deep history, that compelling story that makes a timepiece more than just a lump of metal and some gears. Well, today we are exploring an incredibly rich horological landscape that is currently experiencing a massive, and I mean massive, modern renaissance.
So I really want you to ask yourself a question. Could the next great investment for your watch box actually be hiding in the historical provenance of the Indian market? Now, if you're a traditional collector, your mind probably goes straight to Switzerland, Germany, maybe Japan. But trust me, the history and the sheer scale of the revival happening in India right now is something every serious horology enthusiast needs to be paying attention to.
All right, here is our investment thesis framework for today's explainer. First, the horological pedigree. Second, the 1920s wristwatch disruption. Third, the Microbrand renaissance. Fourth, reviving Marcks Co. And finally, the collector's appraisal.
Okay, let's jump straight into Section 1, the horological pedigree, a history of royal commissions.
Looking at how this whole thing builds over time is actually fascinating. Starting around 1858 in the mid-19th century, British watchmakers really dominated the Indian trade with these heavy, solid, decorated pocket watches. But then, right around the 1890s, we see a massive pivot to the Swiss pocket watch era. The Swiss started bringing in these highly ornate, mechanically complicated pieces that were slightly more affordable, and they absolutely captivated Indian royalty. Fast forward a bit to the 1920s, and we hit the wristwatch disruption era, which just turned the industry completely upside down. And finally, that lands us right in the 2020s, the modern microbrand renaissance era we're living in today.
You know, we often think of Swiss watchmaking as this isolated stroke of mountain genius, right? But consider this incredible quote from the celebrated watch expert and auctioneer Osvaldo Patrizzi. He basically states that the commercial success of great Swiss watchmaking was largely driven by demand from markets like India. It was actually the immense buying power and this huge appetite for complex complications coming from the East that stimulated and paid for those legendary Swiss artists.
And just to really drive home the sheer opulence of this market, get a load of this anecdote. The Nizam of Hyderabad, literally one of the wealthiest men in human history, once strolled into the Marcks & Company showroom in Bombay. And he bought an entire display case of custom-ordered pocket watches simply by pointing at it with his gold cane. I mean, come on, that is the level of historic, heavyweight provenance we are dealing with here.
Moving right along to Section 2, the 1920s wristwatch disruption. Basically, adapt or die. This is where we really see the cyclical nature of watchmaking. Think about the 1920s Swiss market shift. It was a brutal adapt or die mentality. The jump from pocket watches to wristwatches was a total shock to the system, honestly on par with the 1970s quartz crisis. Great, legendary makers of pocket watches went completely out of business if they couldn't pivot to the wrist. Now, contrast that panic with the 2020s Indian market trend. Today, modern entrepreneurs have a totally different vibe. It's revive and thrive. They're intentionally digging back into the archives, dusting off these dead 19th century pocket watch brands, and bringing them back to life as contemporary wristwatches. It's brilliant.
And hey, if you're still skeptical about the Indian market actually driving global watch design back in the day, just look at this absolute icon. The Jaeger LeCoultre Reverso, born in 1931, is undeniably one of the most famous watches of the 20th century, and it was invented specifically for Indian Army officers who desperately needed a way to protect their watch glass during really aggressive polo matches. The Indian market wasn't just buying, they were actively forcing horological innovation.
Which brings us to Section 3, the microbrand renaissance, the new wave of Indian watchmaking.
Just take a look at the absolute diversity of the Indian microbrand scene blowing up right now. You've got the Delhi Watch Company pushing out the Dagri chronographs and Havelock dive watches. Then there's Argos watches, who are out there proving the financial viability of this whole space by raising 6.5 crore in a recent angel round. You have Adorned, creating kukuri models that feature gorgeous enamel dials. And stepping up into the higher end, you have Nilanam, crafting Swiss-made timepieces that integrate these deep Indian motifs. Think square pushers and a rotating chakra disc instead of your traditional seconds hand. But the driving force behind these brands? It's not just some cold, calculated corporate strategy. It is intense, fiery personal dedication. Take Krishna Raman, for example. He's a chartered accountant turned founder who launched Nalanon right from the center of the Swiss watch industry. He said, "I've invested my life savings. When you have a passion, you have to follow through with it." That is exactly the kind of dedication fueling this new generation.
All right, let's get into our main event. Section 4, Reviving Marcks Co., Rebuilding a 19th Century Bombay Retailer.
So let's finally look at the actual metal. This piece right here is the Captain. It is directly inspired by those robust Marcks Co. pocket watches that used to be issued to British Indian Army officers. Just notice the really crisp, disciplined aesthetic they went with. It features this great off-white dial, double-printed deep blue Roman numerals, and those matching deep blue hands. It is a really gorgeous, faithful translation of a vintage pocket watch face shoved into a highly wearable modern 40mm wristwatch. Then we have the royal-inspired heavy hitters. We've got the Nizam, obviously paying tribute to the nobility of Hyderabad, rocking this stunning emerald green sunray dial inside of gold-plated case. And alongside it, the Raja, inspired by the Maharaja of Patiala. That one features a super regal blue sunray dial framed by a really striking bicolor case with a gold-plated bezel. Also, both of these feature some pretty incredible azurage finishing on the small second subdial and the railway tracks, which just adds so much depth.
Okay, but the crucial question for us nerds, how does the spec sheet actually hold up? The founders behind this, Arjun and Bhavesh, are trying to produce as much as humanly possible in India, like the dials and the straps, but they wisely, in my opinion, opted for Swiss mechanics to guarantee reliability. So, for a retail price of $1,200 US, you're getting a Swiss-made Sellita SW260-1 Movement, complete with a custom gold-plated mandala rotor. It's housed in 316L stainless steel, sitting at a perfectly modern 40mm across, and a surprisingly slim 10.4mm thick. Oh, and of course, sapphire crystal. On paper, these are highly competitive enthusiast specs, for sure.
And finally, Section 5, the collector's appraisal. Let's weigh the actual market potential.
Let's look at the totally unfiltered market feedback, straight from the Microbrand watches community on Reddit. The positives are definitely there. Collectors really love the tasteful design. They specifically called out that crisp white dial on the Captain, and they heavily praised the super clean date window integration tucked inside the sub-second style. However, collectors are brutal, and there were some really sharp critiques. A lot of folks found the text-based logo, even though it's paying homage to the original brand, to be way too oversized and wordy, specifically griping about the Mumbai and Pune text. Even worse, eagle-eyed collectors noticed that the brand's product photo had visible dust, smudges, and literally reflected the lighting equipment. Yikes.
One collector really hit the nail on the head, summarizing the danger of these missteps, saying, "At this price point, visuals matter just as much as specs. The execution needs to reflect respect and polish." And they're totally right. When you position a watch at $1,200, you aren't just selling stainless steel anymore. You are selling a luxury experience and absolute attention to detail. A dusty promotional photograph can instantly undermine a whole century of revived royal heritage. Now, to their credit, the founders have openly acknowledged this feedback, proving they're actively listening, which is honestly a fantastic sign for a young brand finding its footing.
So we throw it back to you. We've traced this incredible lineage, right? From the 19th century British and Swiss pocket watches custom ordered by Maharajas, straight through the brutal 1920s wristwatch disruption, all the way to today's passionate, fiery microbrand renaissance. You've seen the impressive specs, you've seen the royal designs, and you've heard the sharp market critiques of their initial execution. Knowing the profound history and the sheer, undeniable ambition of this revival, does Marcks & Company deserve a spot in your watch box? Ultimately, that is an appraisal only you can make. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and definitely keep your eyes peeled on the Indian horological frontier because it is moving fast. Catch you next time.